Hi there, AP Psych class. Welcome to Unit 9, Part 5 on adolescent development. Okay, the official definition of adolescence, right? It's this transition period between childhood and adulthood. You're not quite a kid anymore, but you're not quite an independent, fully functioning adult. So let's talk primarily what changes occur during this time period, both physically, cognitively, socially. So let's start with the physical. Adolescence is going to usually officially begin with the time of developing sexual maturity, which we in health class remember call puberty. And so that's a couple years of rapid growth and development, usually around the age of 11 or 12 in girls and around the age of 12 and 13 in boys. So we have growth spurt, we have the development of primary sex characteristics. That's going to be like the actual maturing of the reproductive organs and genitalia. But then we also have non-reproductive traits called secondary sex characteristics. Like examples would be the development of breasts in female, or being able to grow facial hair in males. And so usually adolescence is marked by that initial physical change in us. Okay, cognitively, what is happening here is that we have, let's review from some previous sections. We know that there was rapid neural development occurring in those early years of childhood, and so the adolescent brain is undergoing that selective pruning, right? Unused neurons, unused connections are kind of being eliminated. We know that the last part of the brain from our Unit 3 discussion to fully develop is that frontal lobe. And so that could explain the adolescent, and again, this might be a generalization, but the occasional impulsiveness and risky behaviors, poor decision making that is sometimes characteristic of the adolescent brain may be a result of that underdeveloped frontal lobe. Lagging behind, I guess, the fully developed, very emotional limbic system. Okay, so that's kind of physically what's happening in the brain. From a psychological standpoint, if we recall what stage, if we align this to Piaget, we'd be in that formal operational stage. So adolescents are capable of thinking logically about abstract as well as concrete propositions. So that kind of enables us to detect inconsistencies in other people's reasoning, spotting hypocrisy, which could also explain why adolescents are often tagged with having a very cynical mood. It's as a result of this, initial cognitive discovery of, wait, what? Not everything that comes out of people's mouths is true, and being able to think abstractly. Not everything is as black and white as it was in childhood, and that sometimes, leads to, being upset emotionally. Okay, so a new theorist to implement here under cognitive development is Lawrence Kohlberg. He kind of proposed that in addition to our cognitive development, like Piaget was talking about, that our moral thought progresses through stages. And so he divides his stages into 3 basic levels: pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional. Okay, pre-conventional and conventional. Well, pre-conventional would have been when you were a child, right? So think before conventional thought, before what society views as moral and immoral, as primarily children telling you what's right and wrong is based on whatever gains rewards and avoids punishments. Thorndike's law of effect. Conventional moral reasoning is going to be emerging in early adolescence, and that's the emphasis on gaining social approval as a result of upholding the social order, right? So doing what society feels is moral and not doing what society feels is immoral. At some point, some adolescents, according to Kohlberg, will base moral judgments on their own perceptions of basic ethical principles, and those would be the individuals that employ post-conventional morality. But Kohlberg did not think that everybody necessarily reached that final stage. And so obviously the majority of people, right, the average answer has to be the conventional level, or else we wouldn't be able to call it the conventional level. So that's kind of related to our moral development. Concerning, getting adolescents, because you always hear, articles, like adolescents are, morally, reprehensible, and they do all sorts of horrible things. That's it, in childhood that begins, in teaching people to delay gratification, become more socially responsible, engaging in, responsible action through service learning projects. Those things are important in childhood to ensure that they continue through adolescence. But we do know that moral ideas grow stronger when acted on. And so giving people opportunity and praise for doing right action can often solidify, proper moral feelings in the individual. Okay, so concerning social development, let's talk about Erik Erikson. He was briefly addressed in the personality unit when we talked about post-psychoanalytic thought, right? People that altered Freud's theory of development. So his is a psychosocial stages of development. So like Freud, he believes that your early relationships solidify who you are as an adult. But unlike Freud, he does not focus he focuses less on sexual relationships and more on just general social relationships. And so Erikson, we kind of mentioned in the social development section for children, and that infancy is the time, remember, that you're going through the stage known as trust versus mistrust. And so giving the child an opportunity to know that, we have consistent love and affection, right? That contact, comfort, and all of that stuff that we talked about. If not, Erikson says you have an adult that is mistrustful of relationships. Toddlerhood, if that's a word, it is autonomy versus shame and doubt. And so I always have to remind myself of that stage with Charlotte, and that yes, sometimes it would just be easier to dress her or put her shoes on for her, but this is the time period where she has to be learning that she's an autonomous entity. And me constantly doing things for her only gives her the impression that she has the inability to do things for herself. And so that's important. The preschooler is going through initiative versus guilt. The elementary student is going through competence versus inferiority, right? Being compared to their peers. Adolescence is where we get to forming an identity that's listed there for you. And so identity versus role confusion, right? Who are you as an individual, separate from your family, separate from your peers? That is the major psychosocial goal of the adolescent. And so that's important to keep in mind concerning social development. Trying on these many hats, these many roles, and trying to, whether it be an amalgamation of those or whether it be, tossing the hats that don't fit, coming up with who you are as an individual. That's the social role of the adolescent. Okay, the final thing to mention here is that, especially in Western cultures, it seems as if adolescence has become extended. So we tend to call it emerging adulthood. It's like adolescence part 2. The time period between 18 years of age to the mid-20s is increasingly in our culture a not yet settled phase of life, right? And so some psychologists kind of refer to that as emerging adulthood. It's like characteristics of adolescence are still there because we've kind of delayed when actual adult life begins. We've kind of pushed that back on our culture's social clock. And so, adolescence is kind of a socially constructed period of development in that, way back in the day, it wouldn't have mattered. It was like you were done being in school and congrats, you were an adult and you did all your adult things. There wasn't any transition period at all. And so that's something interesting that we can discuss in class. Okay, so bring any questions that you may have about this transition period known as adolescence with you to class. And you have one more section left on adulthood. So thanks for listening.